Welcome to the Critical Therapy Antidote podcast.
Welcome, everyone. Naomi, welcome to the CTA podcast. Christine and I could not be more excited to have you here. I feel like it's long overdue. It really is long overdue. You are a former student now from Santa Clara University, turned whistleblower prior to ending your student career there. And this has been kind of a journey of 1,000 miles. I feel like I've been observing from the outside since we connected, since I've gotten to know you, as you've been going through what has to be among the most tumultuous whistleblower experiences I've heard in our profession thus far. I think those, who are watching right now might be somewhat aware, but some might not be. Can you give us a little bit of background as to who you are? What kind of pulled you into that whistleblower label identity and what's been going on over the last couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was pursuing my master's in counseling psychology at Santa Clara University, which is a Catholic school in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was in my last year before I started practicing therapy in a practicum. And one of my final classes was called Human Sexuality. So when I first enrolled in this class in summer of 24, I opened up the syllabus and immediately found just shocking syllabus content. We were required to read sadomasochistic erotica describing a violent gang sex punishment situation. A wife had taken off her collar and she was punished by her husband with gang sex, where she was, blindfolded and suspended. And it was written in a really titillating manner. And it was also very violent. So there's that. And it was presented in a promotional way as well. It wasn't a critical analysis of like, oh, some people, engage in these types of sexual practices. It was full affirmation, sexual liberation was the framing. So that was how it began. And there was also a pornographic illustration guide was our textbook. That was also very titillating in nature. I mean, you know, bronzed, fit bodies and all sorts of sexual positions with however many number of people. And also bestiality was depicted in a really crass, I don't know if I would go as far to say promotional way, but in a humorous, cavalier way. And there was instructions there on what lubrication to use with farm animals as not to harm them. Um, so that was pretty shocking. But the thing that really just stopped me in my tracks was the final assignment, which was a 8 to 10 page comprehensive sexual autobiography. So we were asked to describe things like, when did you first start masturbating? Chronicle your sexual past and present. What are your erotic goals for the future and how are you going to achieve these things? Just completely an invasion of privacy. And I said, no, I'm not writing my sexual autobiography for anybody to read. Um, so I asked for an accommodation, just a simple accommodation to respect my own privacy and also to respect my Christian faith, that my sexuality is a private part of my marriage. And I was denied by every level of this Catholic school, by the professors, the dean, the chair. I went up to the president. It was the whole chain was just either indifferent, didn't respond, or told me no. So I dropped the class. And when I re-enrolled in it the next quarter, I requested for a accommodation that was given to Muslim students um, to take the course remotely, and I was again denied that. And a couple weeks later, I find myself in class being prompted to write something down that I disliked about my genitals to have it read aloud. And so as the class is going on, I'm just getting worn down, worn down, worn down. There was a transgender guest lecturer came in and started talking about P words, like female genitalia, P words, um, just absolute insanity. And the final straw was a promotional sex dungeon tour in which a woman was flogged, gagged, electroshocked, had a knife drug across her neck. And at the end of the video, the professor goes, "So, who wants to try it?" And at that point, I had just had enough. I walked out of class and said, "No, this is completely inappropriate. It's not education. I'm not going back." So the Wall Street Journal ran my account of what happened, and it's been a whirlwind since then.
Mhm.
Yeah, and there's so much baked into your story. The first time we ever spoke about it, I don't think I could appreciate how much time had actually gone by as these things were escalating for you.
Yeah.
And, the timeline of this, it's not like it was like happening over one semester. It was happening over what, a year, 2 years through this
The
program,
course of a year. Yeah,
the
the
course
course
of
of
the
a
year.
year.
Uh-huh. And
Yeah,
so,
it's
mhm.
go ahead.
Well, while that's happening, I mean, so I'm as I'm like thinking through this, I'm like the spaces in between. I'm like, okay, thinking back to my own experience in graduate school when I had coursework that I didn't feel when I felt like it was more on the critical social justice side, which I think is where we're headed with this conversation. It was it wasn't all the time. I think that's always, the hard part to kind of understand about these things. It's not every single moment is baked with these like really punctuated events because it is so drawn out. But each time it happens, I'm just kind of wondering, you know, was it like that for you, or was this clash just kind of this consistent confrontation with these different things that didn't sit right?
Yeah, I felt like throughout the whole program, it wasn't every single moment of every single class. I got some good education at Santa Clara University. There was the underlying critical social justice as was kind of interwoven in the assignments. We were asked to, analyze our privilege all the time and, view things from the intersectional lens. But in higher education, I think we all just get used to doing that at a certain point. I went to UC Berkeley for my undergraduate degree, so that was just it's a foregone conclusion that critical social justice is the lens, but the sexuality class made it so much more explicit. It was pretty much from the get-go in every lecture. Um, the I think that sex is such a fundamental part of being human, and the the binary of male and female is so obvious, yet that is a project of critical social justice, to dismantle that obvious binary. And so it takes a concerted effort to dismantle that. And I did find that it was in almost every lecture. I mean, there was um, it felt more like an agenda driven class from the get-go rather than just information about sexuality
Mhm.
or even how to treat sexual disorders or sexual dysfunction, which I'm disappointed about because sex is a big part of marriage and family. And I was training to become a marriage and family
Mhm,
therapist,
mhm.
so I wanted skills to
Mhm.
deal with that. Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting from the professor side because I don't know if I've ever shared a little bit about my background, but I was a professor at a university called Antioch. Leslie Elliott was there as a student. I was a professor, and we met because of that connection. And it is somehow baked in to all of the classes, the critical social justice, because I found myself even in my own lectures and with my own material that there was stuff that I was teaching that had the kind of that tainted underlying stroke of that, which I avoided quite a bit until it became unavoidable. And I had to say, either I can take this out of the class and still teach here, or I have to leave. And the answer was, well, you have to leave
Wow.
because it escalated, right? Sort of like, what you're talking about. There's a little bit of a grooming feeling to it where there's a little bit upon a little bit. And before you know it, you're off the cliff. I guess I'm kind of wondering for you, like, what point was it like, okay, this is
Mm.
off the cliff now?
Well, I think it was when the transgender individual came into our classroom and started talking about P words. Um, that felt like, to give some background on
Mm.
this individual transitioned in late adulthood 50-something decided to live life as a woman and made the full medical transition. And the lecture that was presented wasn't about gender affirming care, what it is, um, what gender dysphoria presents like, what are the different treatment options, what are the pros and cons of the treatment options. That I think would be good clinical information to have. This lecture, the entirety of our education on gender dysphoria was presented through semi-erotic diary entries of this person, documenting their own experience of autogynephilia. And I asked at one point, when the person was talking about, I don't know how I feel about the whole pronoun situation. People are very strong on either camp, preferred pronouns or not. This person, I don't know, I'll keep saying that. But um he, I mean, he lived as a man for 50 years. He came in, he's a male, and was talking about gender euphoria, the experience of well, I asked, is that when you refer to gender euphoria, are you talking about like being truly aligned with who you really are? And just without a beat, he goes, no, when I looked at myself in the mirror, I almost came.
Mhm.
And that felt really exhibitionist to me. Like there was something going on under the well, not really under the surface. There was something going on there besides just coming and speaking about gender dysphoria and gender affirming care. It felt more like a performance. And in fact, he also mentioned that the Judeo-Christian ethic was a big source of oppression, and prompted us to discuss with each other and with the class how we felt personally oppressed by the Judeo-Christian ethic. And then also mentioned that, part of the transgender movement, which I don't fully agree with, but part of how he sees it is gender effing. And that means the intentional muddying of gender norms, not for the sake of personal um, satisfaction with one's own felt sense of who they are, but for the purpose of disrupting the gender binary. So that felt like a specific political project that this person was advocating for us to partake in and be advocates for.
And what was that term again?
Gender fucking. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, So at that point, when I'm sitting in class, I am thinking to myself, we have gone off the cliff. And that's when I came home and I started writing. I was like, this needs to be documented. Even if this never sees the light of day, I just need to write down what's happening because it's that insane.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I've jumped ahead in some ways because, there's so much baked into the story of what you were experiencing just in this classroom alone, in the context of this greater socialization that's taking place through your education, of it just being baked into every single course. And then you get to this line. It's kind of like this line glared red for some reason, of this is just the line. This is it. And you
Yeah.
have somebody coming in who's describing their transition in an erotic fashion, in an exhibitionist fashion, the way you're describing it. And by nature of that, almost creating this what sounds like an undesired voyeuristic experience for you and your classmates.
Yeah.
When that was happening, did you get a sense from anybody else in the class how they were experiencing things? Or, how were you reading the room under those circumstances?
The classroom was very silent that day. There was a lot of hesitation to engage in conversation. Um, there were a lot of jokes. Like he came in and he said, I'm here to indoctrinate you into gender ideology. Just said that. And it was unclear.
Explicitly.
Yeah,
Hmm.
just explicitly. And it was unclear if that was tongue in cheek or if that was just an admission. It was said sort of tongue in cheek, like he was making fun of the right wingers for talking about gender ideology. Um, and then with he said trans women have the only P words that can blow up the world. That was supposed to be a joke. I don't know what the joke meant. Nobody laughed. it was very tense that day. But, throughout the rest of the class, I think some people enjoy it. Some people enjoy dismantling normativity, not just around the gender binary, but also the normativity or the norm of modesty. When we were asked to write down something that we disliked about our genitals, we shuffled them up. It was not anonymous in a small class. And then the professor redistributed them. And then we were reading each other's dissatisfactions about our genitals to the class. And, some were sad, but like one person was like, oh, my penis is just too big. And, there was some gravitas there. And then in the class feedback, he said that anonymously the professor got so much feedback that they loved that exercise. So there are undoubtedly people who share my discomfort and know to keep their mouths shut, or else they'll bear the consequences that I've bared. But I do think that there's activists in the class too who like it.
I think that's the thing that's the most disturbing about all of these stories is the need to keep your mouth shut. I mean, you're in a graduate program, and part of what you're doing is you're developing a skill set, you're developing, your own approach to how you want to practice therapy if you become a therapist. You're, exploring, what it might be like to work with people that are like you or work with people who are not like you. All of these things, and that gets completely shut down because speaking up in class, and that's at least what I have witnessed, and it sounds like it wasn't a safe environment. I don't even like the word safe anymore, but it wasn't a comfortable place for you to be able to say, I don't agree with that, or I'm not feeling connected to this. Something here doesn't feel right.
Right.
And that to me is what's really one of the most disappointing parts of all of this, because it's taking away in a sense. And I wonder if you felt that was happening. I mean, that it's really taking away from your experience in terms of how you want to learn and what you want to glean from this and where you want to go with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, so I was the only person in the class who would, albeit gently, push back on some of the assertions about gender affirming care for youth, or even just some of the conclusions about how oppressive the Christian faith is, or the Jewish faith is, to women in particular. And I was actually told in so many words that I was talking too much, which,
Yeah.
there is some truth that I was contributing to the class more than others, but the class seemed like it was structured in a way that was like, okay, we have these non-scientific theoretical conclusions that we've made about the nature of human beings and the nature of sex. No need to think. We are going to present them to you, and then we'll ask you how you feel about it. Say you agree, and then we'll move on to install more beliefs.
Right.
I think it would be so cool if we could have a robust discussion. I am more than happy to talk to somebody who believes that gender affirming care is the best way to deal with gender dysphoria in youth. And we could, break it down and have a rigorous debate and discussion, but there's no room for discussion in these classes anymore. It's like the bar is set so low for the learning expectations, it seems, that it's not seminar based, discussion based. It is look at our slides, look at the genderbread person, and tell us that you agree that gender identity and sexual orientation and sex assigned at birth are all distinct and all social constructs.
And it's that succumbing to silence, that silencing mechanism that's like set in advance. It's accept and adopt this and then move on. And as we've talked to people over the years, different people have like almost a different, if there was kind of a scale to this, experience with those silencing pressures. And for you, I'm hearing you describe this explicit no, accept it, and we'll move on. We'll stamp that you imbibed that and then regurgitated it for the class, and then we'll keep going on with that process. I mean, it's such an obvious indoctrination process that's taking place,
Yeah.
and maybe not even a super effective one in some sense, in that you're not having a conversation about it. There is nobody that's there that's able to, if you challenge them, to challenge you back and show you how their conclusions are logically coherent. They're not they don't sound like they're even concerned with whether it's logically coherent. It's just quite literally take it and move to the next sender, perhaps.
Yeah. And what is so disturbing to me too is that this is not some grievance study PhD program where they're training me to become a professor and teach it again. They're training me to be a professional who is interacting with the psyche of another human being, and what they are modeling is an abuse of power. And it is
Yes.
an intolerance for other people's worldviews.
Yes.
And I am worried that nobody is providing the example of how to listen. Our professors are not asking us about um, how we think, how we view the world, and then respecting it. They're saying there's one acceptable worldview and conform or get out, essentially. And they're also in turn modeling that, that's the way to do it with clients.
Yeah, and I guess, in my experience as a professor, so sitting on the other side of it, and I wanted to have these engaged conversations. What I found was the people that did speak up or try to speak out were shut down by other. It's almost like I had to spend my time micromanaging all of these adults so that people had a fair share of time to say what they wanted to say. But at the end of the day, we weren't in a political conversation. We were not studying politics. We were studying how to be a therapist, how to work with somebody that's experienced trauma, how to work with somebody who's experienced addiction or whose family member is experiencing addiction, how to work with somebody who's experiencing a death, grieving and loss. That was my area of kind of focus for the most part. The debating aspect didn't always have a place in the classroom. So there were these points in time of trying to figure out, yeah, we can go back and forth, but there are also times when we need to spend focusing on understanding how to sit and be in the room with a client, with another person. And that's not debatable all the time, right? So it almost felt like I spent half the time at least trying to manage and somehow micromanage these conversations that actually had no place in the classroom to begin with.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was thinking during a lot of my education too, when we were getting caught up talking about our own identities or putting this critical social justice lens on everything. I was thinking, what are we missing? What is not happening in the classroom right now? And honestly, clinical skills training.
Yes.
I had 2 classes in total in a 90-unit program where we actually practiced on a regular basis talking and listening. 2 in the whole program, and the rest was um accepting the conclusions of the program. I wish there I wish there was a hands-on model somewhere where every class we could see role plays from the professor, or we do role plays with one another, and actually practice, because I got to the end of almost to the end with all of my coursework feeling like I was very competent in writing a paper about psychology from a critical social justice lens, but not very competent in talking to somebody and treating somebody who has psychopathology, who needs
Mm-hmm.
help for OCD, for bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got to my practicum placement, to be honest, I felt a little inequipped. Like, I never actually saw a patient because I was fired before that happened. Um, but I was nervous that the education that I got at this pretty prestigious university was not going to be
Yes.
sufficient.
And
And
that's
that's Yeah,
So
I'm
if you
sorry.
don't
Go.
if you don't mind,
No, yeah, go ahead, Michael, please.
that's a typical experience for a trainee, even when they are being trained appropriately. It's part of the process of becoming a therapist, and it's part of the process of being a therapist to always kind of be like, do I have the skills? Kind of experiencing different clients that make you feel unskilled and then reskilling yourself along the way. But you're describing not even feel like you're getting that baseline training. And earlier you had spoken to the consequences, and I wanted to return back to that because something Christine brought up felt really important, which is, I don't know that I've ever asked you. I mean, if you feel comfortable talking about it, what drew you? You wanted to be a marriage and family therapist. What drew you to that work in the first place? Because I'm hearing one journey pursuit and this thing just getting right in the way.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious if you're willing to go there. Just like, what drew you to that work in the first place?
Yeah. Um, that's a good question. So I was raised in a very academic household. My dad is a professor and my mom is a marriage and family therapist. And there was a high value on achievement, but there was also a high value on you use knowledge to either help individuals or advance society or humanity in some way. And I thought that my skill set was well aligned with therapy. I really like people. I have natural, unconditional, positive regard for people that I meet. I really like perspective taking, and I actually have a high tolerance for conflict. I think that conflict is um, interesting, and I thought that I could be helpful in mediating that with couples and in families. So it was always in the back of my mind as an option. Also, when I was about 10 years old, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, aggressive breast cancer that was not responsive to chemotherapy. And we began seeing a family therapist, and it was a lifeline. So I believe in the profession. I believe that families, individuals, couples should have somewhere to turn when they need more help, when there's too much on their plate, um, when they need outside support. And I I worry now that the professionals that I'm interacting with, that isn't their highest motivation, it seems like. It seems like what the profession is being molded into is a tool of political change. And we see that with, just the president of the APA, Tama Bryant, now says, we need to decolonize psychology and therapy is political. But I'm thinking back to my experience as a 14-year-old sitting in a therapist's office when, my family is falling apart because my mom is sick. And those skills need to be the skills to deal with real world suffering is not the same skill set as a political activist. So that's the concern. And that's where it came from. And I still, maybe one day I'll go back to get a PhD and pursue it. But right now I need a break from academia um and this profession.
Mm-hmm.
Understandably so, and thank you
Mm-hmm.
for going there. And I think that's the big part of these conversations that gets left out, particularly when there's aspects that can be like sensationalized, particularly around like sexual dimensions to things, where people who get into this field, I still think, and I don't know what you guys think, by and large, have a good heart and have an experience that's informing why they're doing the work in the first place. We're all human beings. We didn't just pop up in grad school and suddenly just, we don't just like manifest there and then we're just doing therapy. There
Yeah.
are real personal reasons that go into the work. And oftentimes the cliche is the therapist goes into therapy to heal themselves. And to some degree, maybe that plays in a little bit for everybody because who doesn't want to understand themselves a little bit? But part of that process is also to understand yourself, to understand others, to help them through what they're going to. And I'm hearing that embedded family value for you of wanting to use knowledge to improve the lives of those around you.
Yeah.
And these people who have these institutions captured, they don't hold that as the superordinate value anymore. It's like you said, it's just the political takes precedence here. and
It
you just
is.
wanted to help people.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm gonna have to jump in and say this because I went back to school to become a therapist because my mother became ill and we needed to learn how to cope with her illness. So it wasn't the same exact, the same exact structure of in our family, but it was for that purpose. And there's something to losing my place or losing. And
Right.
so I guess I kind of wonder what emotional toll it's taken on you. As Michael's talking about, I'm going into this because I want to learn how to support people in the way that I received support when we needed it. And now you're needing to take a step back. And I wonder if if there are feelings there or what your experience is about. Are there feelings there of loss? Even if it was your conscious choice to stop or to take a break, let's say.
Yeah. No, I'm dealing with a lot of feelings of loss. Oh, it's gonna make me emotional, but yeah, just the loss of my path and also sort of like a shattering of what I thought the profession was.
Yeah.
Because when I got into the supervising meetings at this practicum site,
Mhm.
it's not just in the classroom, it's there too. Um,
Yes.
I had one experience that I'll share and I'll anonymize it as much as I can. Um, but a fellow junior therapist was discussing a case of a biracial or an interracial couple, and the woman had an affair, and the husband had put a boundary that he didn't want to be physically intimate until she had cut off the affair partner. And the conversation in the supervising meeting immediately went to classic oppressive white male. That's a quote. So this very normal, healthy response to infidelity, which is like, "Hey, I don't feel safe intimately," was automatically recast in the lens of, because the husband was a white male and his wife was a person of color, that there was his boundary was seen as manipulation, as a tool of oppression. Um, so I'm just disillusioned. I'm like, and nobody spoke up in the meeting, including me. I kept my mouth shut in that meeting about because, well, I'm trying to figure out why I kept my mouth shut. I think I was in shock. And also there were comments made like, well, we all agree here this is a highly racialized situation. Um, and that is just one example of what's going on in this new activist model of therapy. And I don't they don't want me part of their club, and I don't necessarily want to be part of that club. And it leaves me sad for myself because I feel like the rug got pulled out under me and I don't know where I'm headed professionally now. And also it makes me sad for everybody who's going to need neutral, unbiased care. That's what's really
Mhm.
concerning. I'll get over
Mhm.
I'll figure it out. But the fact remains that there is a mental health crisis in the country, and depression rates are extremely high. Suicide rates continue to climb steadily over the past couple decades, and people need help, and the quality of training is going down, and that makes me really sad.
And you spoke to that, to me, what you were describing was, and I think I experienced this in my education, was the moral injury of running up against something that was supposed to be very protected and safeguarded as a place for understanding human flourishing, helping alleviate suffering. And they're doing the opposite. You ran into just a practicum, a case study of it's the intersection of not identities necessarily that I was hearing, but the intersection of ideas around patriarchy and white supremacy as they're put forth in the critical social justice narrative, and that being used as the lens by which you prioritize a conceptualization, you get nowhere with that. You're
Right.
not gonna if what
Right.
you're aiming for is to help someone, you're not gonna get anywhere with that at all. And there really is a moral injury in this when you run up against a real, you know, proponent of these ideas and the room has the air sucked out.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what you guys think about this. I've tried to make sense of these moments over and over, both in the literature and just like from my own personal experience and the experience of people like yourself. And I don't think we're designed to shake the tree in those moments when the group comes to a consensus. Generally speaking, I think most of us are kind of looking to each other to make sense in the moment of what is acceptable behavior. I think this is supported. I know it's supported. We've all felt these moments at a dinner, out with friends, when the energy falls dead and you just don't know if it's safe to speak. But they're setting that tone in advance for you.
Yeah.
It's very clear that you're not safe to speak.
Right. Well, it's funny because so my experience was so interesting because in that room I stayed silent, right? And it felt dangerous, legitimately dangerous to go against the group. But when after the Wall Street Journal piece ran, I was called to a meeting by my boss to talk over the article with people who had concerns. He originally said that there was one or two people who wanted to talk about it, but the article was widely circulated at the organization, and I was called to a meeting between myself, the director, and 15 junior therapists. And I sat in that room and said what I thought, honestly. And I was attacked. My character was attacked. I was called unsafe. People said that I was going to cause people to kill themselves. But it was
Oh,
also a very liberating experience, because I knew that what I was saying was coming from a place of genuine concern for people. I knew that I was following my own, or, maintaining my own integrity and also telling the truth. And I lost my job because of that meeting, but I also gained a sense of power and agency that I never felt before.
mm-hmm,
Um, I think it's just owning your voice and
mm-hmm.
being unafraid of what people think about you. And go ahead.
Well, just the bitter irony of that, the people who talk about liberation so much don't even have the faintest notion of what that really is. Like, guys,
It's okay.
you're staying like absolutely true to your core. You're using your voice. You're in a struggle session, right? Like
Yeah.
quite literally, you're in like the thing that through my grad school experience was like my worst fear outcome of things that could happen from even saying something that felt just commonsensical to me or just practical in a room. And you're actually feeling, I mean, are you feeling free right away within that experience, or was it kind of after the fact?
It felt powerful right away, I think,
Yes.
because I realized I'm actually not in physical danger. Um, and yeah, it felt powerful to say true things to people who clearly hated me, and knowing that what they think about me doesn't actually define me. Um, I had, I was disclosing really intimate details in that meeting because a big theme of my Wall Street Journal article was this promotional BDSM content. And I shared with Ali Beth Stuckey when I went on her podcast that my feeling, or like the way that I know that just because something is legally consensual doesn't mean that it is necessarily psychologically healthy, is from my personal experience. And I was explaining, again, really intimate details to this room full of therapists, and they showed no empathy. They were callous and cruel. And one person said to me, like, well, it's not violence if it's consensual. And I said, yes, it is. There can be violence that somebody consents to. And legal consent doesn't necessitate psychological health. And that was freeing because they showed their colors. And it gave me a sense of clarity that I didn't have.
Mhm. It's not violent if it's consensual.
Right. Correct. Even if
I
somebody is
mean, it's
beating you for sexual gratification.
there's just yeah, it doesn't hold water. whatsoever. I can't imagine from the like from my side of the table, I can't imagine saying that to anybody, whether it was a group of other professors, a group of other therapists, or a group of students, or a group of trainees. I mean, I don't know that those words would, and it's like, where did anything goes become what we're doing here? And it's almost like this anything goes train that's fallen off the track, and in my opinion, has now crashed and burned, and we have this huge mess to try to sort through, right? Because, and I've said this before, the words like diversity, words like, even the word safe or safe space, those words were not initially, bad words that make us kind of choke to say them now. They did have, the intent or the meaning behind what those words are. They meant something good and positive at one point. Diversity was about being open to other people's experiences and not putting, judgments on that. And that's how we were supposed to be using it. But somehow through this ideological capture, that changed and became something else. So now we're starting to say things like violence is not violence, or it's okay if it's consensual, because we've gotten to this point of sort of overly accepting diverse viewpoints,
Right.
which are actually dangerous. That's crossed into a level, in my own opinion, as being extremely dangerous. And
Yeah.
that's where I wonder how we got to that point. Because when I was in school, diversity, and that was 20 years ago, that wasn't the case, right? It was about being open-minded to somebody else's life path or life story.
Right.
That's not the way it is today. And now it's this anything goes pendulum swing, so that people are now equating violence and legal consent as being acceptable as long as it's consensual. It's okay to beat the crap out of your partner as long as they say it's okay.
Yeah.
Because it's diverse, right? I mean, it's diversity. It's
Well, I didn't realize before this, but the BDSM culture has been they have inserted themselves into the queer movement. So they claim the like the victimhood status of the like oppressed gay people who struggled for, rights to marry their partners decades ago.
right.
So in this framework, my ex-boyfriend who was abusing me for his sexual gratification, he has a certain like level of victimhood that elevates him above me who is experiencing abuse. It's just,
Wow.
and
Wow.
these people are
Wow.
the people who, this is what concerns me too, the people who are like really hardcore advocates of like sexual liberation and sex positivity are the type of people who are going into sex therapy and marketing themselves for people with sexual trauma and sexual dysfunction. And it's leaving me concerned that people are actually going to be hurt by these therapists more
Mm-hmm.
than just bad therapy. I mean, yeah, like bad therapy can actually be harmful
Can be very harmful.
because, the sex therapy organizations, like the certifications demand fealty to this one worldview about sex. So people with different views, like I would say more traditional views on sexual intimacy, are being excluded from those certifications.
Mhm. It's such a game. There's such a remarginalization game. I mean, taking this to extend it over to say that somebody's sexual proclivities, regardless of scale, regardless of how regardless of the details, is suddenly a marginalized characteristic or category that we need to protect, predicated on the notion that these people historically have not been allowed space in a quote unquote normative setting. That's their logic. it's just so circular, and it's just like this never-ending Ouroboros I see in my head of it's a snake eating its own tail forever, and it's not coherent. Now, something occurred to me, when I was in school, the language around people like, organizations like CTA, Heterodox Academy, were starting to try and capture these things. New Discourses with James Lindsay was starting to capture some of the language games that I was really picking up on in the early days. When did you start to become aware that there was kind of this, what are we, the underworld of this now, like the counter movement, whatever we're regarded as? Like, when did you start to understand there were people who were trying to make sense out of what you were experiencing?
You know, actually, really recently.
Mm,
It's me,
hmm.
which is disappointing because I want it to be more well known, but it actually gives me hope that there are so many people who are quietly having the same concerns that we all have, but haven't found people who speak openly. So after the transgender individual came and I started documenting everything, I was like, man, I need to understand what's gone wrong in therapy. So I just started reading. And I found the work of Dr. Sally Satel, who's a psychiatrist. Maybe you guys know her.
Yes, she's
Um,
amazing. Yes.
so I reached out to her, and but bless her heart, she just got back to me,
Like
and
that.
yeah, just like that. She took a call at work at the hospital or something, wherever she's. And she recommended you guys, CTA,
Hmm.
and she recommended Andrew Hart's Open Therapy Institute. And that just opened the door to this whole world of people who have the exact same concerns I have. And um, I think there's more. I think the more we speak openly and the more we voice our concerns, it will gain steam. Because these ideological fads, they're powerful, but I think speaking the truth in love is more powerful. And I mean, that's how I see what you all are doing.
Well, the antithesis to what they're doing, right, is this fear-based narrative that sounds compassion-based, but it's not truly compassion-based in the least. Christine's heard me say this a million times. It's like if you took what compassion is and you inverted it, and you inverted the characteristics of it, and it was imposed, compelled compassion, whatever that is. That's not compassionate. That doesn't make sense to, I don't think that would make sense to anybody who's thinking it through or feeling it through in a healthy manner. So yeah, I'm optimistic that people will open up to it too. But Christine, go ahead.
And it's like at the end of the day, out of all the studies and research that's been done, the most therapeutic part of therapy is the relationship built between the client and the therapist. At the end of the day, all of these theories that matter, we need to learn them. I get all of that, and I taught them and all of that stuff. But that closeness and intimacy and trust and rapport is what tends to be the most healing part of
Yeah.
therapy, by far more than any other intervention that you're ever going to learn. So
Mhm.
it's almost like, that component that's being missed in not allowing you to do not having you practice. I taught process classes where people did practice, being therapists and clients, and I also taught classes that were theory based, but I still made them practice. I would find a way to pull that into the room so that they could use the skills in some way that we were talking about. I wanted to be able to observe it, and I wanted them to observe how they felt, how they were experiencing being in the room, because at the end of the day, it's the relationship. And all of this other ideology and all of this other critical social justice and these kinds of different frameworks have completely, whitewashed, for lack of a better word, the relationship. They've thrown it out the window, and that's not what's become the sort of the cornerstone of what the profession is anymore. The cornerstone is political activism now. It's social justice, it's equality, it's all of these kinds of buzzwords that are going around, not relationship. That word relationship has been erased in a lot of ways, and that's where the healing is, really.
And it requires authenticity, right? Like
Yes,
how
yes,
how could I be an authentic, or how could I build genuine rapport with somebody, a genuine relationship with somebody if I can't be authentic and I have to stifle what I'm really thinking? I mean,
yes,
I can have a surface level relationship and get along with you, but people sense authenticity.
Mhm,
And
yes,
mhm, mhm.
yes. You can't
that
fake that.
You
Yeah,
can't fake it. And yeah, I think that there is, because authenticity is so important and they're requiring an allegiance to a specific socio-political orthodoxy, there has been a concerted weeding out of anybody who doesn't go.
that's right. That is right. 100%. I used to do admissions also. That was part of my job as a professor, was to do admissions interviews, and that's exactly what we were doing. We were weeding out people that didn't have, yes, we were specifically weeding them out. So the questions in the interviews would lead us to conclusions on whether or not the person had enough, you know, social justice activism like qualities or behaviors, not whether or not they would be good sitting in a room with another person and being authentic and, developing a relationship, or even having the right reasons to go into the profession. It was, do they have the activism? What have they done for social change in their community? That was the most important question to answer. And I admitted people into the school, and I take full responsibility for that when I was working there, that I knew in my heart weren't going to be good therapists, but they answered the questions correctly. So the weeding out is real.
It seemed just like, from the pool of people that were in my program, no shade to them, but
Yes.
I really wonder what the acceptance rate is at Santa Clara University, and my guess is that it's extremely high,
Yes.
because the academic standards are on the floor. Honestly,
Yes.
I didn't try that hard in the program. Like, I did my reading, but like, as far like some assignments, I put as much effort in as the professors did, which was very low. Like, that's another thing. All of my assignments were they were self-reflection based, and so the professors would say something like, for the sake of your own privacy, we don't comment on your assignments. So I
Right.
didn't get
Right.
any feedback on my even like theory-based assignments. It was like, great job, exclamation point. Like, the rigor was very low.
That is
And so
very true. It was the same at the school that I taught at as well. The
Oh,
rigor was low, and it was designed that way. Because at the end of the day, again, they're looking for people to go out there and, speak truth to power, to their narrative. And the rigor in the program I taught in wasn't as high either for that reason.
yeah.
Um, but
Was that your
most of
experience, Michael?
At times, yes. I mean, it depended on the coursework. I often say I was probably on the low end of the spectrum compared to some of the stories I've heard in terms of that dynamic. But yeah, I mean, I remember my undergrad being so much more rigorous that by contrast, I came back years later and I was just kind of like, is grad school supposed to be this easy by comparison,
Yes.
And it didn't really make sense to me. It didn't compute for me when I returned. And it's not uncommon now to hear of really large cohort sizes. I mean, particularly amongst masters in counseling or PsyDs. PhD still has kind of that,
Yeah.
that tightness that you have to be able to kind of play ball, but not everywhere. You hear kind of anecdotes of PhD programs that have dropped that rigor. But something kind of occurred to me, and I hope you don't mind me kind of deviating a little bit, which
Go
is
ahead.
you'd spoken to the consequences before, and Christine and I have like spoken about kind of behind the scenes the experience of being a whistleblower, Christine herself being a whistleblower, and the fanfare that comes with that, the attention that comes with that, but also like the unspoken personal loss. I think we've all, in some ways, I was not a whistleblower myself, but I certainly wasn't silent. And I think we've lost things. There's relationships that are part of our lives and people who really feel strongly about these issues. And if it feels okay for you to go there, I mean, what has the effect been for you? I mean, has it impacted your personal relationships? Is that a place you're willing to go to right now?
I will say yes, it has. I'm not going to go into the details
Fair enough.
about that. But I think, yeah, I mean, I've lost a relationship over this, and that's what makes me so, like, that's where the anger comes in. Sorry.
No, no.
That's where the anger comes in, because there is this the allegiance to the overall ideology is such that if you deviate on one specific point, that means that you are on the out group and you are like bigoted or hateful against all of these, marginalized identities. And if you're not with us, you're against us, essentially. So it is a experience of true social isolation. And I live in a very progressive area, and I actually have a lot of progressive values. Um, but there is fear. There's real ostracization that's happened, and there's fear of that as well. We own a brick and mortar business, and when I made the call, do I even want to have a byline in the Wall Street Journal? I had to have a serious conversation with my husband about what that would mean for us, reputational in our community. But the fact that we've gotten to that point where even being published in a right-leaning paper, or being affiliated with the wrong types of people, can make you a social outcast, that is exactly why I did it, because that's unacceptable. And we need to people need to begin bearing the consequences, because courage begets courage. And the courage of places like CTA or OTI inspired me to make the leap and say, hey, I can say true things, and I'm also not a hateful person. And being an example of somebody who will stick by that, and be hated by a certain subset of people, but say it's actually okay and I am okay. I think that was an important example to set.
Mhm. To set that tone. And,
Yeah.
full transparency, me and knowing some of your story, I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to it if you wanted to today. And, I don't know that I've ever shared, the impact that it's had for me. There've certainly been friendships lost and important, significant relationships strained and lost as a result of this, of me just saying,
Yeah.
what the heck? And just asking a question in some cases can be seen as just completely conflictual to this entire movement, narrative, way of seeing the world. So I appreciate you being willing to talk about it and to go there. And kind of wanted to be able to go there because I know in other interviews, it's been very much what I've seen, what I've observed is sticking to the story of what's happened. But the real personal toll of this cannot be understated for people who have the courage of conviction to speak up and to say something, such as yourself.
Yeah, it is real cost. And it's sort of a scarlet letter in my community to
Yeah.
say the things that I'm saying publicly. There's people who agree with me, but they're like, oh, don't say that. Like, we
Mhm.
think those things, we don't say those things. And that's exactly what needs to change. Because that the bullying, the if you disagree with me, you're a bad person, exploiting someone's desire to be seen as a good person is wrong. It's wrong.
I mean, and I think, the fact, because I had to have a conversation with my husband as well before I came out and quit, publicly and left, because there was the financial component, right, which we all have to think about. And then there was this other piece, which is, how's that going to affect him and his business?
Yeah.
How is that going to, I mean, he tends to work in a business that's actually has a lot of conservative viewpoints, so it didn't impact him in the same way, but it might have. And so there was that question. There were the people that I lost, but there are also the people that don't know that I ever said anything at all.
Yeah.
There's this big group of people that I know that I'm still very friendly with, who don't know what I really do. They don't really know about what I do at CTA. It's a part of my life that, it's still, for better or worse, I still keep somewhat hidden. So I, I kind of have been through the loss of some important friendships, but I've also, lost the intimacy in other friendships, even though we still have a relationship. I mean, so it's a really
Yeah.
complicated. And when I was first doing interviews too, nobody really asked that much about how I felt, the personal cost was, and the grief that I felt. My whole identity was this work. My whole identity was being a professor. My whole identity was being a clinical supervisor and a therapist. That was what I did and who I was. And so that component, um, I have struggled throughout this whole process. As much as I love what we do at CTA, it's both. It's not either or, it's and.
Yeah.
I'm really glad to be in this place with these people. And, there's still this piece of me that really longs for what I was doing before that I loved so much, that I was so proud of. I was
Yeah.
proud to be different. And I was one of those professors who was really different. And I was proud of that. But that different is the reason why I couldn't continue. So it was sort of a double-edged sword, if you will.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing that piece with us and with the listeners, because it's we're human beings too. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, we're human. We have feelings. We experience the same things that other people do, and
Right.
it's not an easy decision to make, to come
It's
out and
not.
be public.
I will say, like, the community that you all have built, and the community online that has been attracted to me, and the support I've received is helpful, and it is encouraging to be around people who I truly respect and who are willing to take the risk, because I while it feels safe and comfortable to be in that environment and like at a prestigious university and on this professional track, that feels good, but it also felt extremely lonely because nobody really knew me. And people know me now, and they have the choice whether or not to like.
And
100%.
that's that loss of intimacy that comes with this. If you have to be an island, you can be alone around other people.
Yeah.
You can be very lonely around other
Yeah.
people, particularly when everything they're saying runs contrary to what you believe. And I think what people in the the woke movement, the CSJ movement, the people are in just kind of in those waters and taking it in, forget is that if they were to meet someone like us, we also have definitions of what we think is compassionate and caring, and we also believe ourselves to be operating from a place of genuinely caring about people. As sure as they feel about it, that's how sure we feel about it
Yeah.
at the end of the day. So it's like it's the clashing of these two worldviews at the end of the day. But the question is who's kind of got the clearer lens, so to speak, on what people require in the healing profession at this point. And I don't think it's them, but they might think otherwise. In fact, they do. And so it's like
They
I've
do.
never gotten to really have that conversation in earnest, and I don't know if you guys have, with another therapist who really does come from that side, who wants to have that conversation with me. It's never come up. I've had people who've shut me down and said we'll have to agree to disagree, but I've never had someone really willing, and I'm willing. I'm willing to have that conversation, 110%. I don't know anyone else on the other side, so to speak, who is.
It seems like I don't know, I'm making a generalization here, but it seems like what we're saying, like the things that we say, especially around power and privilege, is threatening to them. They view our worldview as an active threat, whereas we feel their worldview is misguided. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I think there's some
It's some,
accuracy in some ways.
hmm In some sense, yeah. I mean, I see it as a threat in the sense that I see it as a threat to other people's well-being, and that it's potentially going to corrupt the therapeutic process. I mean, when you read pieces of literature that's, poor Carl Rogers is probably rolling over in his grave, where they break down the client-centered approach until you get to the point, it's like 5, 6 steps. I read a piece once that ends on, and here's how you broach this conversation and totally change the therapeutic process. It's like, yeah, you're doing really well in terms of caring as far as I can tell up until this point, and then you deviate completely. And
Yeah.
so I do see that as a threat to what we know is at the core of most therapeutic practices that work. You compare different therapeutic modalities side by side, and in my view, I think generally if the person's ready to make change and they're ready to heal in some way, they can get better. I can't discern necessarily what's better from a treatment or a therapeutic orientation perspective in this moment. But as long as the person's ready and there's a safe relationship. But then when you smuggle this in, that I do see that as a threat to something that is sacred in some sense, to what this agreement is that you're making with the other person. They're letting you into their soul and into their, and I
Yeah.
don't just throw around the word soul casually. That's
No.
part of our job. So,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean I'm not willing to dive in with them and have that conversation. I totally
Right.
am.
It's like the
Yeah.
threat, like you see the threat, but not as to you. You know what I mean? Like when I was sitting in that meeting, they said they felt unsafe in my presence, that I was like a threat to their presence,
Yes.
psychological well-being. Whereas
Yes.
I don't get that sense on the other side, like on our side.
Yes, it's more of a emotional hemophilia to anything that's different to some degree.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I worked
Hmm.
at a clinic that two of the therapists left. They were junior therapists. Well, they were pre-licensed, and they left because they felt there were microaggressions that they had they had worked with clients who were throwing out all sorts of microaggressions to them, and that's why they left, because they didn't feel safe with their client.
With their
They felt
clients.
threatened by their client because their client was throwing around microaggressions, whatever that means to them, because this whole microaggression thing too has become a real buzzword around all of this. But their whole thing was, I feel threatened and I feel unsafe by the client, and that was something that I hadn't seen before. And it was two in particular who were of Asian descent. I don't know what was said. I stayed out of it because I wasn't supervising them, so I wasn't involved in that. But from the tricklings that you hear along the way, that's what happened there. But this is also the same place that required all the therapists to read White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo's book, right? So, I mean, of course,
Wow,
this is not.
the employer required white fragility. I was reading. Oh
Yeah,
my, white
yeah,
fragility
yeah.
was one of my textbooks, but wow, the
Yes,
employer.
yes.
That's
So it's not surprising that then this is who you hire and then this is why they leave, right? All of that kind of makes sense when you start to
right.
think about who they are. And I was a clinical supervisor there. Wasn't going to read the book just by principle, like, and we're not talking about it in supervision. So if people wanted to say something, I shut it down. We're not here to discuss the book. We're here to discuss your clients. I mean, I was really, but I also had a lot of, for lack of a better term, I had a lot of balls. I mean, I was pretty
I know.
ballsy in my approach. So that went, but it didn't, I mean, it only could go to a certain level before I myself was so worn down by constantly fighting back or pushing back that I couldn't, it was too exhausting to continue.
I'm mindful of time, and I want to thank you for coming on, and thank you for your patience, for what you're
Yes.
doing.
Yes.
And you know, today was really about, we wanted to get to know you, and we wanted people to get a chance to get to know you, because there's someone who's going on these interviews and they're getting a lot of views and they're getting a lot of attention, but it's a person. And
Yeah.
what can happen in the modern scape of the internet is you can forget that what's on TV is not merely entertainment, and that there's a person that goes back to their personal life and their day to day, and we don't see that. And that was really the intention of our conversation with you today. That was our hope. And we hope you felt that. And we hope in no way did it feel invasive in any
No,
way,
no.
shape, or form, because you are a real person, and
Yeah.
you did something. I've often found that people who go through these experiences anecdotally don't like being called brave. And I don't know what that is, but I'm going to say
Yeah.
what you did was courageous. And it was courageous because it wasn't
Very.
in the absence of fear. It wasn't in the absence of fear, even though that moment came up where you finally felt that solidity with your with the struggle session they tried to put on. It wasn't in the absence of fear. There's reasons why you didn't push back sooner, or you were trying to go after something that was important to you. And
Yeah.
this ideology and the people who push it forward and aren't as brave as you or as willing to say something got in the way of that. And even with them in the way of that, you didn't just go along to get along. You said something. And that means something to people both in this community, but I think just societally generally. that's something to emulate.
Yes.
So thank you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think for everybody, who gets these moments where like there's a lot of hubbub, it's really overwhelming at the time, and there's a lot of buzz. But yeah, at the end of the day, like I'm a mom, I'm a stepmom. I have to figure out what my next steps are. And I didn't do this to go on podcasts. I did this because I think that there's a real problem in the profession. And I hope that, all these little drops of people making an impact will actually amount to something. And thank you guys for what you're doing at CTA.
Yes. Well,
Absolutely.
thank
And
you
we're
so much. And I echo everything that Michael said as well. And, you know, just know that in the moments when you feel the most alone, or if you have a moment where you go, my God, what did I do? I just blew everything up, that it's okay and it's going to pass. And there are people there that have, definitely want to throw support your way in any way that we can. So, hopefully you don't have too many of those moments, but I know that they can certainly show up. And you've got a lot of support. Just feel free to always reach out as well to us as a network. And you know we do what we can, so we just want to reach as many people as possible. So yeah, thank you, Naomi, very much.